Hey you, and welcome to another episode of The Western Hippie. I wanted to just jump on here quickly and record a new intro because when I recorded this podcast, it was about a month ago, and I was still recording and creating podcasts for Live Align Radio, which I'm not anymore. So I just wanted to put a proper intro for The Western Hippie on here, and I also have a few other updates. And so I have all the blog posts and the details about my MDMA therapy session at michaelapollock.com/MDMA therapy. That will all be linked in the show notes. So if you want to know what went on in my MDMA sessions, which I've had a few people read them and they said it was super helpful for them to kind of read the process that I went through. So if you want to know the actual details, I highly recommend going to michaelapollock.com/MDMA therapy and reading all of that there. And then I'm also have decided to audiobook my MDMA session because it is long. It's it's about 10,000. I think it's almost 11,000 words. So I am going to read them, and all of the links to, if you're subscribed to the podcast, you will get them because I'm going to put them on the podcast. But all of the links and the resources will all be at michaelapollock.com/MDMA therapy. And I think that's basically it. I really hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you for being here on The Western Hippie with me, and enjoy the show. Today I'm going to talk about my first two experiences with MDMA therapy. And no one is more surprised we are here in this very moment than me. In my last episode, it was the second part in the series of things I was wrong about. And I talked about what I was wrong about with MDMA therapy and really what took me from I'll never do drugs to having 2 sessions of MDMA therapy under my belt. And also, I truly believe it is a medicine. And I compare it a lot to a hammer. A hammer can both be used as a weapon or a tool to build and to destroy. It's really the intention that we go into it with and the plan we go into it with. So yes, of course, there can be a misuse of MDMA therapy as with anything else. And I really don't like going into the housekeeping side of things. I've actually always thought that using disclaimers and stuff was a cop-out, but unfortunately, we are here in 2022, and before we dive into this episode, I do need to go over a couple disclaimers. So the first one is, this is not medical or treatment advice of any kind. Before you do any form of treatment, you need to consult with your doctor or your therapist, and not some blonde on the internet. My goal in sharing this is really to inspire, to speak the truth, and to elevate. I don't really have a term for it yet, but to elevate this awareness of both the problems and both the possibilities in healing. I think there's a lot of problems with trauma. And I also think trauma has got a bad name for a lot of reasons, mainly because I don't think we get to the root trauma and then everything becomes traumatic. And then when everything becomes traumatic, nothing is traumatic. And I also believe that people don't always see the possibilities that there are to be on a healing journey and what is possible on a healing journey. And that is what I really want to highlight and elevate. And I never want to tell people what to do because I believe this journey is so personal and so intimate that at the end of the day, only we know what's right for ourselves. And then we hire people or we surround ourselves with people who are professionals who can help us and to give advice and help us make the right decisions. But I really believe that the people around us, whether professional or otherwise, is a support system. And then we are the final decision makers at the end of the day. So I'm not giving you advice. I don't think this is right for everyone. I know it's not right for everyone, and we all have what is right for us. I have met plenty of people who have found incredible amounts of healing through breath work, through talk therapy, through personal development conferences. There is no one right way. again, because it's personalized to us. And in a weird way, I feel like that's almost why we're here on this like floating ball in the middle of space, is to find that path and to walk it. So I'm not here to tell you what your path is. I'm here to be a friend and to walk alongside of you and to speak the truth to things that have worked for me, and to not be embarrassed or ashamed about it. And in that, I hope that I can grant you the same permission to speak and live your truth and not be ashamed of it. So that's my first disclaimer. I'm not giving advice. I'm not telling you what to do. In anything you do in life, please consult your medical professionals, whether that be a doctor or a therapist or a dentist or a dermatologist. Whatever floats your boat, go consult them. And then the second thing is, if you are listening to this episode and you know me personally and you feel the need to reach out to me and tell me you're worried about me, don't. If you have not talked to me in 6 months and you're listening to this and you want to reach out to me, don't. Unless you're asking a question and you're curious. I don't want to hear, Michaela, I'm worried about you. Michaela, are you sure about this? Yes, this is something I've been doing for quite some time now. And if you do not know about it until you've listened to this podcast episode, I'm sorry, but you're not that worried about me. So as much as I love you, if you have those opinions, keep them to yourself. If you have questions, I am more than happy to talk to you and to anybody who has questions and point them to the right path. If they choose to seek out more information about this and the pieces of information that I have found helpful, whether they be books or podcasts, I'm more than happy to point anyone to the right direction. But I do not want to hear if you are worried about me. So I love you. I will talk to you soon, but not about that. So there was one other thing that I was going to say, and I always say the train left the station and I was not on it, and I'm hoping the train comes back to me. Maybe it won't. Maybe we're just meant to board a different train and keep going. So if it comes back to me, I will let you know. Until then, we're just gonna move on with this episode. So without further ado, hey, look, the train came back to me. We're doing great. So in this episode, I'm actually not going to talk about, if it comes up, I'll talk about a story or two of what came up in my journeys. I do call them journeys and not trips, because it feels very much like a journey to me and not a trip. Maybe because trip has so much taboo on it, like, oh, you tripping? No, I was on a journey. I was on a magical journey elsewhere. I don't know. And so I'm going to make my reports public, and they will be at michaelapollock.com/MDMA therapy. I will link all that in the show notes as well. But I probably won't talk much about my specific stories unless they come up in context of something else I'm talking about. My goal in this episode, I have a couple questions wrote down that I've been getting that I'll talk about, but I just want to talk to you like I'm talking to you at a coffee shop. And so I don't know what's going to come up. And the hard part is I'm actually talking to a webcam, pretending like it's you. So I'm going to pretend like the webcam is you asking me questions. But I don't know. I just don't really want to get into detail about it here since they are written. So if you want to know what actually came up in my journey, then please go to, again, michaelapollock.com/MDMA therapy. You can either download the PDF versions of my trip report, my journey report, my write-ups, whatever you want to call it, or I'll have it there as a blog post as well. You can read, you're more than welcome to read those. That's why they're online. But here I'm mainly just going to be talking about like what my experiences were, how do I believe they helped me, why I believed it was really powerful for me, and anything else that comes up. And then the details, like I said, are going to be in the PDFs or on my blog or yada yada. You get my point. So I guess without further ado, let's get into this. I don't know. Without further ado, just reminded me, did anybody ever watch Zoboomafoo? Without further ado, Zoboomafoo, tomato. Never mind. Anyway, continuing. So, yeah, I've done MDMA twice. I don't know if that was just my confession, but it very much felt like a confession to me, even though I don't feel bad about it or guilty about it, but I needed to get that off my chest if that wasn't obvious already. So I guess I'll start with talking about like why I believed it was so impactful for me. And the craziest thing, or the most ironic thing I guess I could say is I always had this saying about you can't bullshit a bullshitter. Little did I realize I was the biggest bullshitter I knew. And that's why I could spot bullshit from a mile away, was because I had spent years and years and years of building up what I now refer to as a bullshit wall, which is just quite the visual. You know, did you ever make paper in school and you have like all this other paper that you're melting together in this weird way, and then you lay it out and you make more paper? That's what I visualize in my head as I say I was building this bullshit wall. But I really was, because for multiple reasons. I don't know if you're into the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 6, and we very much do things out of safety and security. Like, that's our driving force behind a lot of our decisions. And I don't say that as an excuse or as a crutch. I say that as an acknowledgement of how I am, and use it as a tool to learn how to get around my own bullshit. And I didn't want anyone to know that things weren't okay, or that I wasn't perfect, or that I didn't have it all figured out. And so I built this wall of making it look like I had everything figured out, that everything was okay, that I had all my things together, when on the inside, on the other side of that wall, I really was lost and confused, and scattered, I guess, in a lot of ways. Like, there was always this oh my gosh, I've never said this publicly. I've never said this out loud, but you know, while we're here, let's just get everything out there. I'm sorry, this is hilarious for me, because it's always been an inside joke with me, myself, and I've never said it out loud. I was the sad, broken-hearted cowboy on the inside, and I think that was why it's raining here in the Pacific Northwest, as always. So if you can, and it's very loud on my end. I don't know how it's going to translate, but it's a really pretty sound, actually. So enjoy. But I think that's why I related to sad country songs so much, was because I had painted this front that I never expressed and went through what was on the inside, which was this sad, broken-hearted cowboy. I mean, I love sad country music, and I always have this visual. Maybe I watched too many Westerns as a kid. I probably did. But I had this sad, broken-hearted cowboy inside that see, it's kind of hilarious. It's kind of terrible, but it's true. I never let anybody see that. And the MDMA was the... Sorry, I'm just having this visual of me, myself, and I just riding alone on the range, because that's how I felt on the inside. Going to find my dog and my cow on my solo horse. It's not funny, but it kind of is. But the MDMA was the first thing to really break down that wall and expose that. And not only expose that to the world, and not really much into the world, but to me. Like, that was the craziest thing, was not that I had built this wall, and not that I didn't let anybody see that I was this broken-hearted cowboy, but that I never let myself see that I was this broken-hearted cowboy. I'd made the joke about, gosh dang it. I crack myself up, if you haven't noticed, and maybe that's because usually I need to laugh, and I can make me laugh even when it's not funny. But I had made the joke about it, but I never admitted that that was a real thing inside of me. And the MDMA broke down that wall and let me see why I was so sad. Why did I become this broken-hearted cowboy alone on the range with my dog, my cow, and my horse? Why did I become that? And the MDMA really showed me that, you know what, that is not you. It's this compound effect of all of these things that have happened to you that has created this within you. And let's take it out and show you who you really are. And that was my first trip. And that's another thing I'll talk about throughout this episode, is the differences between my first trip and my second trip. And now I'm calling it a trip instead of a journey. But my first journey and my second journey was how it still is boggling my mind how different the two were, because the first experience for me was really a journey of showing me like, this is who you really are. All of these other things that have manifested within you are not you. It's just, again, a compound effect of all of the things you haven't dealt with, and this is who you really are. And that was really beautiful for me, because I think when something has become such a pattern and become such a habit, we forget to differentiate of, is this us or is this not us? And it's like this gap between what happened to us and who we are just closes and closes and closes. And all of a sudden one day it merges as one, and we forget that it started as two. And the MDMA really allowed me to separate those two things again and remove and be aware of what's me, what is not me. And the biggest way that it did that was going through, and it was, I'm going to use a movie reference because, film school, but it was like I got to watch the director's cut. It was like I got to watch the director's cut of my movie, and I was the editor, and I got to go back and be like, nope, we're going to get rid of that. Nope, we're going to get rid of that. Obviously, I didn't change the past, but I got to change my meaning to the past. And one of the things that showed up repeatedly for me was how many times that I said something was okay when in fact it wasn't okay. And it compounded and really made me realize, and I've spoke about this in the last few episodes, but it's been so impactful for me, is the difference between flat tire traumas and check engine light traumas. So the flat tire traumas, so for me, this was basically the two accounts of sexual assault that I experienced. Those were so obvious, and like I had to deal with them right away. Part of that was because, I went to court. So kind of had to deal with it. I mean, you don't really have to, but just talking about it repetitively, because you have to tell the officer, and then you have to testify, and then you have to talk to all these other people about it. So I had talked so much about it that eventually it started to lose its power over me, and I got my tire changed fairly quickly. But these other little things, the saying that something was okay when it was not okay. I'm trying to think of some little examples. I probably should have read my own reports before I talked about this, but when my animals died, I honestly thought that to get past something, you had to say like, no, it's okay. And that was how it wouldn't hold power over me. And that was the first time I realized by saying something was okay when I was hurt actually kept the power over me. It was like putting a lid over it, but not letting it breathe. And I never let myself breathe and move through it. So I was basically diminishing and dismissing my own feelings. And I created the thing that I didn't want to create. I created this manifestation of all of this check engine light trauma that I learned to ignore, because this light would come on and say like, Michaela, you're not okay. I'm like, nope, it's okay. Michaela, you're not okay. Nope, it's okay. Michaela, you're not okay. Nope, it's okay. And after a while, it became very not okay because I never cleaned up the mess. It was me sweeping this stuff under the rug and not acknowledging it or addressing it. And so my pet would die, and I wouldn't want to be overcome with sadness forever. So I'd be like, it's okay. It's the circle of life. Things happen. And my feelings would be like, okay, I guess we're not going to talk about this. And then, I'm trying to think of something else from the trip that was a big thing for me. It was mainly just anytime I had like an emotion come up. So when my parents split, I didn't think that still bothered me. And so I said like, no, it's okay. They didn't get along. They were meant to split. But I actually, in the moment when I saw myself at that age, it wasn't okay. And so I got to go back in and say like, actually, no, this wasn't okay. I really hurt in that moment. And those were things that I'd never given myself. And again, I never would have said those things were bothering me, not in a million years, because I had just learned how to ignore that check engine light that kept coming back on because my car was still running. And then it would randomly break down, and it's like, well, you do a little cleanup work and then the car keeps going, but it's never running as optimally as it could be. And the MDMA really showed me that. So those are kind of the two reasons I think that it was so impactful for me. Was one, it let me see around my own bullshit. It let me acknowledge how that brokenhearted cowboy became to be. And then two, it let me go back in and edit my movie the way that I wanted it to be edited, as in going through and saying like, hey, actually that wasn't okay. You hurt in that moment, and it was okay to hurt in that moment and feel through that. And it's crazy. It's just wild. Like, I still kind of have a hard time articulating it, but being able to, actually, that's another reason it was so powerful for me, is there's this joke between my uncle and I about who's the most stubborn Pollock. And I've never admitted that it was me. And I think it might be me. I'm like 90% there that it's me, but that other 10%, I'm just, sorry, Uncle Brad, I love you, but I'm holding out that 10% that you're the most stubborn of us all. But I really don't know that I would have believed any of that had I not seen it for myself. So I think my therapist could have said, you know, all of these things that have happened in your life are still bothering you. And I don't know that I ever would have believed her. I don't know that I ever would have looked in the mirror and said, oh, shoot, no, that wasn't okay. And everyone's journey is different. For me, as present day me, seeing little me hurting finally allowed me to acknowledge it, because it wasn't me looking onto me. It was me looking onto a child who happened to be me. And I think most of us will do more for other people than we will ourselves, especially children. And so maybe that's the inner mother in me talking, but that really helped me see how much I hurt in those moments that I was dismissing, because I got to see a child hurting and I got to go give her a hug and say like, hey, that was okay. Or that wasn't okay. And we're going to work through this together. It just so happened to be me. But I'm not saying I never would have. If I would have got to a point where things were painful enough, maybe I finally would have admitted that, no, that wasn't okay. But being able to see it for myself was so impactful for me, because the stubborn little human in me wants to see things for herself. You know, what did my uncle say? Gosh, it was so funny. I only believe half of what I see and 0% of what I don't see. And I'm not fully, okay, I want to say I'm not fully like that. The harsh truth is I probably am fully like that, but allowing me to see that for myself was super impactful for me. And that was really my first experience, was differentiating who I really am, to all of these things that have manifested that aren't actually me. They had just been so combined together as one that I didn't know how to separate the two. And there was this moment, the start of the journey, where I got to fly up. And if you're super woo, if you're super spiritual, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'll try and term it a different way, so it's not all just spiritual woo woo stuff. But I got to fly up into the clouds and meet my higher self. And that's the woo-woo part of it. For the not woo-woo part of it, it was like, I got to go see myself for who I truly am and not who I was acting like or showing up as. And that was really powerful, to see myself for who I could be and for who I really am, and not what I'm acting like. And seeing the power in that, you know, I'm actually just kind of realizing this now as I'm talking, but I didn't realize how stuck in my masculine. Okay, I take that back. I did know how stuck I was in my masculine energy. So I actually think it might be important for me to frame this. If you look up the yin and the yang symbol in Chinese medicine, it's that circle that it's kind of split in two with a raindrop, and it's black on one side and white on the other side. But the white side has a little speckle of black and the black side has a little speckle of white. If you don't know what that is, just look up the yin and yang sign in Chinese medicine. And so I believe that's what masculine and feminine energies are. Like, we both have both of them, but as a general rule of thumb, this is not a blanket statement across the board, but as a general rule of thumb, Women tend to have dominant feminine energy with a little bit of masculine. Men tend to have dominant masculine energy with a little bit of feminine. And we have what our true nature is, and then we have the nature and the energy that we're showing up with. So for me, I am a woman who has natural feminine energy, but I was showing up in my masculine energy all the time, and I wouldn't let that go. Part of it was protective mechanisms. I felt safer being in my masculine energy. And then the other part of it was, and I didn't realize this, but I tried to be the son my dad never had. And so I was so stuck in this masculine energy, mainly because I saw strength in that and I didn't see strength in my feminine energy. And when I got to fly up on the clouds and see this woman in front of me, I, for the first time, saw the strength in being in the feminine energy that I had just kept missing. And that really helped me. And, it's still something I, have to practice every day. When I wake up in the morning, I'll go into my feminine energy, but something will happen and I default back to my masculine. So I'm very much still in practice of this, but that was the first time I was like, I'm actually going to work on this and I'm actually going to practice staying and being in my feminine energy because I finally see the strength of it. So I think that was another powerful thing for me, was seeing that for the very first time of like, oh, that's the strength in being feminine. Okay. And I think a lot of us struggle with that. I'm not alone in that. I know I'm not alone in that for sure because of some of the conversations I've had. So that was super powerful for me. And yeah, those were kind of the things that really impacted me from my first session and how I believe that it helped me. And then I guess we'll get into my second session. It's kind of crazy because I'm like, man, did I talk about that long enough? But we're hovering at about 25 minutes. So I think we did good. So my second session, so first of all, like I said, I still am blown away at how different my first and my second sessions were. So first session, very spiritual. I felt very out of body, like very, what is that? The Miley Cyrus lyric, the midnight sky, the like head high up in the clouds. I felt very high up in the clouds. My second session, I was very, very in body. That was the first major difference. And then the second major difference for me was, oh gosh, how do I explain it? The first session had a lot to it. With going back to the movie metaphor, it was scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, scene 5. Like I felt like I had got through all 26 scenes of this movie, where the second session was very much, there's 2 scenes and we're dealing with all of those. And it was kind of crazy because when the journey first started, I felt myself trying to do what I had did in the last session. I felt myself trying to move on. And the medicine kept telling me, nope, stay here. Nope, stay here. And I think part of it was because my second session, I needed it more than my first session. Obviously, I couldn't have had my second session without my first session, but I needed it more, and it was deeper and it was heavier and it was very much harder than my first session. This is where I guess I will talk a little bit about what was actually in my session. So I had touched on this in my first session, but in my second session, I finally wrote about it publicly, but I had been very open about the sexual trauma I experienced when I was 12. I have not been open about the sexual assault experience I experienced when I still don't know how old I was, to be honest with you. From what I've gathered between my 2 trips, I believe I was between 5 and 8 when it happened. I believe it actually did take place between the ages of 5 and 8. Like I think it went on for 3 years. I have a hard time, and this is one of the reasons I won't say names and I won't use black and white statements, because it's still up for interpretation. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know if I ever will. I will talk about, in fact, the things that I do know happened, the things that are still very much in a gray area. I'll tell you, like, this is what I know. This is what I don't know. But when I was 12 was the first time that I had a memory resurface from what happened to me when I was a kid. So I started getting assaulted by the horse trainer that I was taking lessons from. And then I started having these memories resurface of something happening to me when I was little. And I thought I was about 5 at the time. And the reason I believe that I remembered it was because your brain blocks things out to feel safe. And at that point, it became safer for me to remember that memory than to forget it, because I believe my body was trying to protect me from having the same thing happen again. It had already started, but it was like, hey, this is what it can escalate to. Like, don't let this happen again. So even though I was very much brainwashed and I had Stockholm syndrome, which there's another story about that. I'll have to do a podcast episode on that, because I actually, even as a really young kid, didn't believe in Stockholm syndrome. And then little did I know I would be dealing with it a few years later. So yeah. So I didn't talk about that publicly. And the weird thing is, it was like I never let my inner child, however you want to say it, like I never let her talk, and I never let her have her day to say what happened to her. And so the second session, there was 2 parts of the session. It was like part A, part B. Part A, I was at my babysitter's house where it happened, and she was like showing me all of these things of taking me through the house, and we never really got to what exactly happened. If you read my trip report, you'll see why. Like at one point I just looked at her and was like, I don't need to know what happened to know that it wasn't a good thing. And then the second part of it, which this was entertaining, was so it was me and my 8-year-old like walking around my babysitter's house, and for the first part, and then the second part we were at my childhood home, and it's actually where I still live, and she was counseling me. I kind of forgot how sassy that little thing was. And so to have my inner 8-year-old counseling me, like, that was an experience all of its own. So anywho, that whole story, the reason of that was to say, like, I could not believe how different the 2 experiences were, of one just being this super out of body and spiritual experience, the second one being a very in body experience, and then the one being we're going through all of these things, and then the other one, it's like we've got 2 places we're going today and we are staying there. And you know, the person that I work with was really like, you know, the medicine really has an intelligence of its own. And after my first session, I believed that. But again, with the stubborn thing, I didn't really, I believed it, but I didn't understand it. That'd be the way I would word it. I didn't understand it until I had the second session under my belt and saw how different the 2 experiences were. And that really made me pause and think, whoa, this is wild how it does know what you need, whether you know what you need or not. And in trust, surrender, receive, that's why they say it's so important to have only that intention going into a session of the trust, surrender, receive. Is if you put intentions on the medicine, other than that, if you go into it wanting to see something, I think I'm got a few people that I think will come on and talk about it. Because like I said, I only learned so much about the medicine. And then I was like, nope, I'm good. I don't need to know any more about it. So I'm going to have a professional or someone come on to do like a more in-depth on that. But I believe that is where bad trips come from, because we go in with the intention of wanting to see something. And then when we don't see it, we put an intention on it as bad. It's like, well, it's not what you needed. You didn't get what you want, so you labeled it as bad. But if you trust, surrender, receive, you will always get what you need from the medicine. And that is was the most beautiful part to me, was how it knew what I needed in both scenarios more than I knew what I needed. And again, it's truly mind-boggling. So yeah, those are kind of like I said, the outline. I'll probably do I'll definitely do more episodes on this for sure. I'm definitely not done talking about it, but that was kind of the 2 differences in the 2 experiences that I had. And so before I wrap this episode up, I did want to talk about kind of what it's been like post journey, because that's been a ride, I suppose we can say, of not only integrating what I learned in the sessions, but also talking about it, because So I did my first session about 9 months ago. And so I started talking about it, and it was kind of, the way I explain it is like I was kind of constantly just dipping my toe in the water before I jumped all the way in. I was like, I dipped my toe in, and I dipped my foot in, and then I got my legs in, then I got waist deep, and then I decided to just, jump in the pond, and hence why we're here, the water, the pool, whatever. Hence why we're here, because we're in the pool. Congratulations, guys. Grab a towel. Because I wanted to see how I felt about talking about it. And I wanted to really, I had kind of made a decision to not talk about it till I got to my second session. And I'm glad that I did that. So my first session, post my first session, so what it was like kind of after that, it definitely got harder before it got better. So I definitely went back. I got really depressed, actually. And there was a few factors about that, but it was like that wall that I'd been building up, even though the first session had started breaking it down, it felt like during the session, it got 25. You know what? No, actually, I just, as I'm talking, I am realizing the medicine let me see over that wall, but I still had to break it down. And that was what I felt like after my first session. I really felt like that was what my journey was continuing to break down that wall and allowing myself to express who I really am and find out who that was. And like a big thing, I'd quit writing for a long time. And throughout this journey, learning like, hey, behind that wall is a writer. Hey, behind that wall, you still like horses. Hey, behind that wall, you are like this feminine woman. And so the medicine let me see over it. And I think that's why it did get harder for me between the first and the second session, was because that wall had to get torn down. And that can be a really hard process of tearing something down that has been a protective mechanism for at least 20, if not more, years of my life. So I believe that's why it got harder. In hindsight, I wish I would have done a few things better. I wish I would have, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. I wish I would have been a little more intentional about journaling a little bit more. I did journal more, but I didn't make it consistent. I was not ready to go back to a therapist. I actually, for the first time in a long time, am ready to go back to see a therapist. I don't think that was right for my first journey. So I think after the first journey, I think just being a little more intentional was the thing that I wish I would have done. But especially the first 30 days afterwards, I still kind of had they call it the post-session glow. I still had that for sure. But in all honesty, for the first time, I was just being more honest with myself. Again, with that wall being built up, I had so many lies that I'd been telling myself. And for the first time in a long time, I was aware of the two. So I would go to say something, or I would go to do something, and instead of my default being, oh, that's okay, it would be is that actually okay? Or are you just saying it's going to be okay? So it was this heightened awareness that I just hadn't had in a really long time. And my meditations were better. So that was really cool. And then the second session afterwards, I'm not even at the time of this recording, I'm not even 30 days post session. And this one, again, the medicine told me what I had to do afterwards. So in my second session, I had a lot of stored guilt come up and why this guilt was stored. And so this one has been a lot of work of removing that guilt and not letting myself default back to the pattern. So that was kind of one thing that I had been missing for a long time. Was throughout these sessions, I would go dig all this stuff out, but I wouldn't fill it back in with anything. And so that's kind of what I'm walking through right now, actually, is filling it back up with things that I want to fill it back up. So I had these meanings that I had attached that were no longer serving me, and I dug them out of myself. And then now I'm really intentionally filling them back in with what I want them to be, whether that's being more in my feminine energy with more love or compassion or joy, and not perfect by any means. Like I said, I'm very much just discovering discovering this in the last week of being intentional with what I fill my time back in. And then also being honest about like what I actually want to do with my life. Like, okay, these things are no longer serving me, not only emotionally, but physically. They're holding me back. They're keeping this weight on me. And so this very much feels like, I don't know how. So like the first session was like, okay, this awareness, this is what you could be. And then the post first session was like breaking down that wall so I could be that person. And then this second one post feels very much like, okay, let's actually create those things. Like, let's actually create those things that serve you. And I feel like that's why I have been creating again. Like, I haven't been on Instagram and creating content for almost 2 years, like a year and a half at least. And now it's coming easy to me again. Like, I started the podcast back up. And so it was like, destroy the old was very much after the first session. And then this one feels like a very much like building the new. And it's really exciting. It has not come without tears and anger and frustration. And it's been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but it's also been one of the most rewarding. And again, that's why I feel called to share this with you. Is one of the things that I have been repeating to myself is hard does not mean bad. And I think in our culture, just as a general rule, we correlate hard and bad all the time. If something's hard, that means it's bad and therefore should be avoided. But almost all good things also come out of hard things. And so, yes, this journey has been challenging, and yes, it's been hard. And it's also been one of the most rewarding and freeing experiences that I've ever experienced in my life. And yeah, it's so wild. That's like the term that I keep coming back to, is how wild this journey and experience has been. And yeah, I never, friends, I promise you, I never thought I'd be here. And I'm even more blown away that I am here. So I wrote down some notes. I've been trying not to look at them, but I am going to look at them, and I'm not editing this because I just feel like, not that editing creates like dishonesty, but you know, when someone's like editing and you're like, what did you say? And some things should be edited, some things should not. I don't feel like this should be. So I'm going to look at my little notes. No, actually, I think we covered it. See my notes? If you're on the podcast and not the video, then you can't see my notes, but I did have my notes, and I think we covered it. So if you have any questions, then please send me a DM on Instagram. That's Instagram / my handle, which is Michaela Pollock. Go to my website, whatever that thing is called, michaelapollock.com / MDMA therapy. Please, feel free to reach out. And it doesn't even have to be about MDMA. If you're just on a healing journey as well and just want to talk with someone and, share your accomplishments, your wins, as well as your WTFs, I'm always here. I really love being on this path with other people. So anyway, until next time, my friends, I hope I made some sense. Do you ever get done talking? You're like, did I make any sense, or did I just talk round and round? Could be a little bit of both. But like I said, go read the write-ups. Those are I've let other people read them, and they said they enjoyed reading them. I'll leave it at that. So anyway, until next time, my friends, be a rebel, live aligned, and go make a ruckus. And don't forget to subscribe to the show. I'm done talking now. I love you. Goodbye.